You're listening to the Fix the Money, Fix the World show
on the Bitcoin Made Simple Podcast Network.
Here's your host, Luke Mikic.
Welcome back to the podcast, guys. I hope you're all doing well. Today I'm introducing an episode that I recorded with Phil Gibson, and I honestly could not think of anyone better to be talking to at this particular moment in time here in April 2022 as we watch the world melt down, okay? It is all happening in the geopolitical and the macroeconomic sphere. We have obviously Russia invading Ukraine. We have Russia and Putin giving the middle finger to the West, saying, guess what? If you want our oil and natural resources, you're going to have to pay us in gold, rubles and Bitcoin. I think that's massive, and a lot of people aren't talking about it. We obviously talk about the breakdown of the petrodollar system, and Phil follows all of this really closely. So I think it's going to be a very wide-ranging conversation. We also talk about the possibility of the United States weaponizing the US dollar. A lot of people are talking about how the petrodollar system's breaking down and the US is about to lose its global reserve currency status. But Phil and I actually both share a pretty uniquely held view in the Bitcoin space. And it's not a commonly held one. So I think you guys are going to enjoy that discussion. We obviously talk about the possibility of states within the United States fracturing off and succeeding. Phil is actually from Texas, so we talk about the possibility of Texas succeeding from the United States. We kind of talk about it all, so I think you're going to really enjoy this one. Literally just the week after I recorded this one with Phil, I got to meet him at Bitcoin Miami 2022, and it was amazing. He's a really cool fella. I look forward to recording with him on the podcast plenty more times moving forwards. Speaking of some more people that I had the pleasure of meeting at Bitcoin Miami 2022, let's hear from today's show sponsors, because we have a new sponsor on board with us today, and that is the BitBox02 hardware wallet. It is honestly probably one of the easiest hardware wallets I've actually used, and I've used them all. Okay, I've used Cold Cards, I've used a Ledger, I've used Trezor, I've created my own multi-sig setups, but honestly, the BitBox02 is the easiest hardware wallet to use. I'm looking at it right now. It's sitting on my desk. It is slick. It is sleek. It is sexy. It is a Bitcoin hardware wallet that just simply works. Okay. You can set one of the things up in 5 minutes. It's actually very easy, very beginner friendly. So I highly recommend you guys go and grab one. Honestly, if you don't have your coins off an exchange, go and do that pronto, okay? The world is melting down, and having Bitcoins on an exchange is dangerous, in my opinion. If you want a BitBox02, you can go to shiftcrypto.io, and if you use a promo code Bitcoin Made Simple at the checkout, you'll get 5% off your BitBox02 hardware wallet. That's Bitcoin Made Simple, no spaces, all capital letters. Go and grab one. And now let's hear from another show sponsor who I had the pleasure of meeting. So that was obviously Justin and John, and they are from Coinbase. Do you need Bitcoin support? Well, you can book a one-on-one video call with a Bitcoin Pro on Coinbase Connect. You can ask questions about mining, self-custody, multi-sig, how to run a full node, and how to set up the Lightning Network, and how to accept Bitcoin payments. Simply go to coinbase.com, select a pro, and find a time when you're available. It's that simple. Learning about Bitcoin has never been easier.
You sound fine. Do I sound fine?
Yeah, you're all good.
Okay.
Let's jump into it, brother. I actually don't even know your rabbit hole story, so I suppose that would be a good place to start. Maybe you can kind of give us your background, Phil, what you were doing before Bitcoin, and then how that kind of led you into Bitcoin.
Yeah, definitely. So my rabbit hole story, or the way I think, the way I think is, the reason why I think the way I think is really, short answer is podcasts, specifically libertarianism. I was raised conservative, taxes are bad, and just all that stuff, but socially liberal because I like rock and roll, play guitar, long hair, all that stuff. But, I just, my values are kind of based in common sense, which I would assume and hope that's the same common sense that the majority of people share. So that's kind of where I came from. And when I was in college, I didn't feel like I was learning exactly like the keys of the world and like, how shit works and this and that. And so I started to branch out a little bit and get kind of both sides of the political spectrum, and started listening to NPR and leftist stuff and everything to like the very right of that, like Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity, and that's kind of like where my media audio consumption started, and and then I eventually found podcasts, specific shows like Buck Sexton, that like still kind of like right conservative ish stuff, and then a lot of with Crowder, and I saw the light, or found the light rather, when I came across Dave Smith, who does the Part of the Problem podcast, and he was a libertarian, is a libertarian, one of the most influential libertarians I think of our generation, just because he lays it out in very layman's terms what the fuck's going on and why the state hates you and all this great stuff. And from him, I went down the Murray Rothbard rabbit hole and found Scott Horton, and that's where my whole foreign policy slash geopolitics stuff kind of came in. More so geopolitics recently, and combining that with macroeconomics, thanks to Tom Luongo, who's just fucking awesome. Like I, not to show Tom Luongo, but to show Tom Luongo, I'm like the top tier patron on his Patreon, and I'm in the Slack, and I'm just having all this great information from all these other great brains who have just market experience and have been hedge fund managers, and it's just great. So that's kind of the way I think, and of course my Bitcoin story, it was your main question. I had to really preface this a little bit, was a mix of Austrian economics and libertarianism and stuff through podcasts. I found Guy Swan's, at the time the Crypto Economy podcast, but is now Bitcoin Audible for the past couple years now. And I heard him on Fagcast, or Friends Against Government, which they renamed for obvious reasons. But it was just great because I at first bought into the narrative that the Bitcoin Cash was better than Bitcoin because the libertarian lean on it. Like, I have a podcast, A Boy Named Sue, Sue spelled Pseu, and when I was taking a break from like foreign policy kind of stuff, I started questioning crypto. Like, what does this shit mean? Why is it important? And well, obviously, it was just like, oh, cool, I can have this money that the government can't like tax and whatever and stuff. Like, can't take away from me. And I started having Sal the Agorist on, Sally Mayweather, who is a fun Twitter follow, great memes and everything. And he had like the B Cash lean, but I mean, he holds Bitcoin. If you're not a fucking moron, you're gonna hold your life savings in Bitcoin. So I had him on a couple times. I had Vin Armani on a couple times, but it wasn't until I got over the Bitcoin maximalist stigma, because from the perspective I heard from the B Cashers, it's like, oh well, Bitcoiners were kind of like communists, and they wouldn't let people have free markets of money within Bitcoin. And so the Bcashers, or they wouldn't call themselves Bcashers, but the Bcashers acted like the American revolutionists and said, fuck you, communist Bitcoin maximalists. And so I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. And going back to the Friends Against Government podcast, which is now Timeline Earth, I heard Guy Swan on there because, I mean, I've liked Friends Against Government because they were just hilarious and talking about just the same issues, but in a very fun, entertaining way, which is what made me fall in love with Dave Smith's show. But Guy Swan was on there, and him with his sincere Southern draw and just speaking truth, because that's really what I believe Austrian economics is truth, and it's just rationality of like why prices do what they do and why increasing the money supply is just gonna deteriorate society. So I'm like, okay, this guy makes total sense. So I'm gonna give his podcast a listen, and lo and behold, would you know it, the first episode of his, and the newest one at that time, was him reading an article from Sally Mayweather. And I had recently, like the week before, had Sal on my podcast talking about the exact same article that he wrote. And the article was called The Economics of Bitcoin Maximalism, where he basically says that Bcash is better than Bitcoin Core because it is more sellable of a money because of like just ease of transportation, whatever. He just completely bastardized whatever Carl Manger tried to argue, because Carl Manger being the founder of Austrian economics. And it was just like, wow. And just, I can't remember exactly what Guy said, to be honest, but just his delivery towards the end of his Guy's take. And plus, when Guy read, like, reading Sal's article, I was on a Boy Named Sue podcast that immediately got my attention. So it was just so funny, like in this serendipitous thing of it's just a domino effect where I'm consuming this content here and there, and it all just like was presented to me not on a silver platter, but it was just kind of meant to be. And then the real eureka moment for me and Bitcoin, or Bitcoin and I, uh, you know, probably my second love, first love being guitar, but my second love being Bitcoin, is that when you have to use it, right? Like the customer journey, the customer experience of like, oh my God. And that's when I was trying to buy my first bit of Bitcoin. No. I was forced to buy Bitcoin because I was trying to buy a VPN because I was under the influence that I needed to buy a bunch of shit coins to kind of give myself a little like IMF like SDR fund when the fiat apocalypse happens. So I have all these cryptos diversified to hedge myself. Because there's another like libertarian-esque guy named Donnie Gebert that has been on podcasts, most notably Freeman Beyond the Wall, which is now just Pete Quinones' podcast now. I realize I'm shilling all of these other podcasters, but hey, the more open source free knowledge, the better. But anyway, that I got his idea of like, oh, I need to get some like sys and basic attention token and all this bullshit. Thankfully, I didn't do that because I wasn't able to. Well, um, why didn't I do that? I don't know. I just was lazy, but I did manage to buy VPN, which I just bought like whatever couple $100 on Cash App, and I use it to buy NordVPN because once you know it, my credit card and debit card wouldn't work on that website because my bank essentially said, this is a no-no item. Like, sorry, I'm trying to preserve my own like privacy and self-sovereignty, and I don't want the Wi-Fi that I think is the Starbucks Wi-Fi to actually be some like super dark, shadowy hacker coder person. So it was just, I mean, I was on the phone I was on hold for 20 minutes with the chick at my credit union, and comes back 20 minutes later, and she's like, "Oh, you need to call your branch." I'm like, "Are you fucking kidding me? Like, you mean this isn't my money in my account that I have complete autonomy over?" And so once you really realize something like that, Alex Fesky says it best. Like people come to Bitcoin through curiosity or pain, and thankfully I didn't burn myself on shit coins, but that was just a great use case of it in on its own, especially after we see shit going down with the truckers in Canada. Bitcoin's fuck you money, and it's a hell of a drug. So that in a nutshell has been my Bitcoin journey.
Couldn't agree more, dude. We could end the podcast before we've even started it on that note. Bitcoin is fuck you money.
Yeah.
That pretty much sums it up. I love it. So much to unpack there, dude. I think we're obviously going to get into Tom Luongo and a lot of his stuff in this podcast because we're going to be talking about nation state, game theory, macroeconomics, and I couldn't agree more with your take there on Luongo. He's one of the rare kind of macro guys that I would actually pay money to go and check out his content. Him, Lynn Alden, and probably Luke Groman. They're probably some of the best minds in the macro space. So if anyone listening hasn't seen Tom Luongo's stuff, go and check it out. Just quickly, how long have you had your podcast for?
Oh, it's been shit, I think like 2018. And
Holy
it's just
shit.
been kind of like a slow grind because I guess me like learning what I am and believe because that's always evolving. And I've been kind of like slacking on it lately just because busy with work and stuff. And I also am trying to take like a more long time preference approach to it because I don't want to like force an episode every week where I'm not sincerely curious about the person I'm interviewing and have questions and to the point where I could like write an article all about that on its own. Like for example, I sat down, shit you not, 5.5 straight hours with Joaquin Flores. If anyone doesn't know who Joaquin Flores is, go look him up. He is a writer at the Strategic Culture Foundation, and he's one of another like geopolitic guru of himself. Just go watch his interviews and join his Telegram group because if you want to know what the fuck is actually happening in Ukraine and not the bullshit lies and propaganda that you're being fed on mainstream media and Twitter and some fellow Bitcoiners in Twitter, that was kind of a disappointment because unless if you're financially compromised to push some narrative, you shouldn't be able to do the homework. If you were able to do the homework on what the fuck Bitcoin is and put in your 1,000 hours with that, you can learn about the history of Ukraine on your fucking own. So I'm just a little bit disappointed in the ignorance or the blissful intentional ignorance or just the insincerity of what the fuck is actually going on and how the world isn't in a vacuum and how it's not black and white and how America is pretty much responsible for every foreign policy fuck up really since the 20th century. So with that said, and before that, but sorry, rant over. You take it away, Luke. Sorry to shit on your podcast.
Hey, keep the rants coming. It's what a podcast for, my good friend. But I suppose you should definitely put a link to that podcast you did.
Yeah, sorry. Let me get back to the point on that. So I talked to Joaquin for like 5.5 hours on all that. I don't know how I'm gonna release it. I might like copy the Breed Love thing and like make 5 separate episodes. And I'm gonna put the video on. I'm gonna try Odyssey and Rumble because fuck YouTube and the ass with the cactus, and maybe BitChute too. But you know, if you're in Bitcoin, obviously you don't like censorship. It's not a very nice thing. And these are just like nice new green patchy faunas of just dumping your content and trying to reach a wider audience. So yeah.
Couldn't agree more. Fuck YouTube. And I'm really looking forward to seeing that podcast out because the whole Russia-Ukraine thing is just kind of just one of the really large events that's going on around the world. And this will kind of transition us into talking about nation states and the geopolitics that's going on at the moment. Because maybe we can get into your article where you describe how the US dollar raising interest rates is weaponizing itself. And it's actually a good thing for Bitcoin. So maybe you could give us maybe like a 2-minute high level overview summary of the article you wrote in Bitcoin Magazine, kind of talking about this idea.
Oh boy, I certainly will try. And I'm looking back in my tweets earlier today. Fucking. I basically did a thread of different articles and talking points for today, and in that is going to be my. I'm just going to go to my timeline. I'm going to stall the show. But a lot of useful articles that I think people will get some value out of, or just a thread of what is going to be discussed for today. Okay, it's in the nest now. So yeah, like a high level overview. Essentially, so if you click on the twat in the nest, it's a retweet, and I'm just gonna put that. So scroll, swipe right in the nest, and that's where my article is. You can find it there. Oh shit, did I do it wrong? I might have done it wrong.
No,
Oh,
I
I did it wrong.
can
No, I did it wrong. It's all good. Okay, we're doing it live, folks. So essentially, I'm gonna put my article in the nest, and what it is, a high level overview, is that you got two basic things going on. If we can just, ELI 5. It's a battle of central banks, or really American globalists versus European globalists. And Tom Luongo, he actually coined the term Davos because this is where the World Economic Forum like meets in with Switzerland, where the fuck it is. I should probably know this off the top of my head, but whatever, go fuck yourself. But yeah, they meet in Davos, and it's essentially the way you can characterize Davos. It's just old European oligarchs, old money, whether it be Rothschilds or whatever fucking other royal family, cults, whatever it might be. Just people that were once the British Empire and just wants this European globalist thing. I mean, just picture Klaus Schwab. Like that is Davos. And them reaching their agenda of like the global 1 billion and just getting people off the planet. And you have them trying to undermine the power of America and the American dollar and dollar hegemony. Now, the words I'm going to say are going to sound like I'm humping the leg of the Fed, which is ironic because I wrote a song called End the Fed. But ultimately, it's really is the cleanest shirt in the dirty laundry, I guess, if that's a expression. And it's gonna ultimately better not only for Bitcoin, but society as a whole. Actually, saying that is better for Bitcoin is relevant because Bitcoin's gonna moon either way. But what you have is you have Davos, the ECB, the IMF, the BIS, all this, just Davos trying to undermine American dollar hegemony and U.S. globalism. So you can categorize the people here as Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, and the United States banking cartel. Like what's the most powerful like bank in the United States? It's the New York Fed. And who's the shareholder of the New York Fed? It's the JP Morgans, Goldman Sachs. And what you are defining is this money transmission thing, which is like how money's created because fractional reserve banking and credit and all that. And this is the essence, the infrastructure of dollar hegemony that no other nation has. And I mean, it's nice enough that the Fed allows like euro dollars to actually be a thing overseas. And what Powell is doing is fighting against Davos because Davos wants to use stimulus such as the CARES Act and just all this COVID spending that we've seen and the Great Reset that's going to take money out of nothing. And they essentially want to destroy America from the inside out and the outside in by destroying its credit worthiness, printing money into oblivion, and also just pass all this crazy leftist bullshit, such as, like trans rights and furries rights and taking away your gun rights and just, not American, not the principles that this country was founded on. And Jerome Powell's fighting back with monetary tools that he has at his disposal. And so, if you're in Bitcoin, you've heard of money printing. It's not actually money printing, but when there's economic crisis, the Fed's main tool is like the lower interest rates, no, namely the Fed funds rate. So lowering it to put in more liquidity into the system, and then raising it or tightening to do the opposite. And it's just this the fables of financial Keynesianism and just central planning teeter-tottering to just try to make happy and work on employment numbers. So yeah, that's nice and all, but what happens when you print too much? And well, we fucking know what happens. It causes hyperinflation. More money does not create more goods and services into the economy, and that's why you get shit that you're seeing today. All the logistics things with, shipping containers and what all. That aside, what you have is inflation or hyperinflation. And what Powell essentially has been doing since June of last year is him raising interest rates, not Fed funds rates of IOER, which is interest on excess reserve, and the reverse repo rate. And essentially, when he does this, it draws out dollar liquidity in the world and it strengthens the dollar. And what he's essentially trying to do is strengthen the dollar as Davos is trying to weaken it by just forcing America to, spend money it doesn't have and ruin its creditworthiness. And we're kind of already seeing this happen and play out because last week Saudi Arabia just said "fuck you, dude" when Biden tries to call him up. And is that the sound of the destruction of the petrodollar? Because if not, it certainly fucking sounds like it. And so this is what Powell's doing because, like it or not, no matter how many nations might sell off their U.S. treasuries, their debt's still denominated in dollars. No, that's going to change. And even Powell came out, I think last week or the week before, that we're okay with having, we're not having complete dollar hegemony. We can have multiple functioning currencies. And a Federal Reserve chairman can say a lot of things. And sincere or not, I mean, he's still a politician in a way, right? So maybe he's just saying that to ease or quell people's fears and just keep everything hunky dory, and we don't have the fucking like lingering depression that we've been expecting, and we'll very well see that sooner than later. But I think he means well because again, Powell is not Davos. There is a strict bifurcation of like within the monetary, like, I guess, supremacy in the United States. And it's this again goes back to European globalist versus US based globalist. But at like this level, it's kind of like Wall Street versus Davos. And again, Wall Street shareholders of like the Federal Reserve banks and commercial banks and all this, they want to maintain their power, and Davos has been passing policies that undercut that power. One example is that they enabled other institutions that weren't financial institutions after COVID to get this easy money access, like to the Fed window. That is only an exclusive privilege the to the banks, like the American banks, and so it's basically allowing like more money printing from all these entities that outrightly didn't have that privilege before, and that was like a Davos-backed policy. And that's when stage right, enter BlackRock. BlackRock is now acting like a fucking central bank. And when you look into the Great Reset, like the actual fucking book that Klaus Schwab wrote, they talk about nation states being, upended by corporations. Corporations become the nation state. And that does not go against that. I mean, no, that goes well against the status quo of what Jerome Powell and these other private equity kind of people want, is because they maintain their hegemony and power by just keeping the banks as they want. Because ultimately, Davos wants to pass a central bank digital currency, like top down, I believe. And like I've gotten in little arguments and scuffles with Bitcoiners about, oh well, it might not be issued like top down from the central bank. It's probably going to be through commercial banks, and the Fed can't do all that on their own. Like, of course they can't. Um, but essentially, I don't think CBDCs are the solution that Jerome Powell and Wall Street really want. They because if you have a CBDC in that way, it undercuts the power of the banks, and it renders them useless. So I don't know how that's really going to work out, because we know that stable coins are being okayed for banks to hold. So they're coming up with some kind of scheme. Maybe it's a more efficient way to do things. I don't know what's going to look like, but essentially, it's Davos trying to destroy the central banking cartel of the Fed, and Powell doing these monetary, tap dances to counter that. And he has done that. And if you look in the nest, you click on the first thing I shared, and you scroll down a little bit, you will see a Zero Hedge article that came out yesterday, actually. And it was entitled, if I can fucking find it, it wasn't an article, it was just a headline. But yesterday, 84 counterparties take $1.715 trillion at Fed reverse repo. So what that means, oh, and there was a, bit jump in one day. Maybe they meant BIP, or maybe I don't understand that. But so when Powell did what he did in June, he raised the repo rate, or reverse repo rate, to uh, basically 5 basis points. And essentially what happens, so I guess I need to get into what a repo and reverse repo is. So basically, a repo contract, as some of y'all will probably be familiar with in 2019, is like just overnight lending. I like to call it high time preference, QE, if you like. But basically, it's so the banks borrow money from the Fed to make good on their promises and other banks, because the banks are the ones that are lending to each other. And when they go tits up like Lehman overnight, they're going to crash. But thankfully, they're holding treasuries, like their reserves or whatever, treasuries that is pristine collateral still in this world. And they park that at the Fed, and the Fed gives them cash to just make good on their promises. So that is a repo. A reverse repo is obviously the exact fucking opposite. Okay. Any excess cash a bank has, they park that at the Fed and get a treasury in return. They get collateral in return. And this is how you drain dollars out of the world economy, and euro dollars, because there are foreign repo facilities. And when Powell raised reverse repo rates of 5 basis points, it's essentially, hey, all this cash, all this money printing that we did, and Ben Bernanke did the same thing with interest on excess reserves, which isn't as like high time preference as the repo markets, but Bernanke raised it 25 basis points. But what this does is it drains the world out of dollars and makes the dollar stronger because, as we all know, in Bitcoin, like scarcity is fucking important, right? And it just it's just supply and demand. And so what this does is it makes debt more expensive for debtors, obviously. But what it really does is it's just an incentive mechanism because now you're earning 25 or 5 basis points on extra cash that you had. It's just like fucking like BlockFi, right? Like fucking fiat, any fiat bills you have, you just send it to this account, and it's your money working for you. So a shit ton of money was moved over the summer, but just yesterday, again, as I read in that little headline, it was 1.715 trillion, and it's shit ton of money. It's not as much as it's like a seventh of what was spent on the war in Afghanistan over 20 years, but still, in like one day, that's a lot, right? And Powell raised it, I guess, 0.3%. So that's a shit ton, is it not? And so you just see these mechanisms, and of course, we can't forget the quarter of a percentage point, or the 25 basis points in the Fed funds rate. And this is Powell and Wall Street working together against against Davos, because there are like European Davos sleeper cells in the U.S., which I firmly believe that is what the current administration is. And if you look in that tweet thread, you'll see, and if you do a little grunt work, it's a perk of being in Tom's Slack. I have all these people sharing all these great little like, nuggets of information, but you'll see that Citibank is Davos, but then you also have JP Morgan, just like non-Davos partisans. Um, and you're just basically seeing Powell using these tools as a central planner, using the tools that he has at his disposal from the Fed to actually fight back against this and strengthen the dollar. And essentially, this kind of gets down to where does Bitcoin fit in with all this? Ultimately, if America wants to preserve its creditworthiness, like, yeah, they can strengthen the dollar by removing this liquidity, but those dollars were still printed. And what you have is still hyperinflation, it's just latent. So that money's gonna go somewhere. And if people in fucking Washington or at the Fed don't have their heads up their ass, they've been paying attention to Bitcoin. And I guess we can get into Russia a little bit. Russia's sitting on like the majority of the world's oil, and they have the marginal like cost to drill oil, and so they have all this energy, and they'd be stupid to not mine Bitcoin. And so you have this beginning of like the hash war, do you not? If Russia is the cheapest place to mine Bitcoin, that should wake people the fuck up at the Fed or Washington. And so they should get on that ball. And instead of just having latent inflation, why not just have all that money go into Bitcoin? I know that's like a pipe dream, but ultimately, I think that's like at the end of the day where the decision they have to make down at the crossroads, for lack of better words.
Dude, that was an epic rap. You were just spitting fire there for a little while. And for the first time, when somebody hears the whole Davos thesis, maybe it could be a little bit lost on them. So I thought maybe just to give them a couple of more points to kind of back everything up, because a lot of people hear it at first and they're like, that sounds crazy. But it makes kind of more sense, and it kind of helped me understand everything, because I was kind of perplexed with the whole coordinated responses in terms of, we'll just call it COVID for the YouTube, amongst central banks all around the world. But when you look into the whole Davos connections, everything makes a lot more sense. And then when you look into the United States trying to protect its global reserve currency status, that's where it gets more interesting. because it was June 16th. That was when you were talking about
Yeah.
when Jerome Powell raised those rates on the reverse repo window. It's also interesting to add in there that it wasn't, he raised this, was it the same day or the day after Jerome Powell had a massive fight with Christine Lagarde at one of those international
Battle of
meetings?
banks. That's what the fuck it is.
Yeah, yeah, it's a battle, it's a weaponization. And so the whole thesis that Phil's putting forward and the one that Tom Luongo talks about a lot was the US broke ranks in June 2021. They said, fuck you to the Great Reset. We're going to actually go our separate way and we're going to actually try and protect the US dollar and our global reserve currency status. We're not going to go along with this Great Reset. And that's when they kind of raised rates in June 2021. So I think that was just a point to put in there, and they're trying to defend the petrodollar system. So I think that's very, very interesting.
Or if the petrodollar system fails, then maybe it just becomes like the Bitcoin dollar. I'm just talking out of my ass now, but I think it's also interesting, like, when is Powell lying and when is he not? Because when he says it's okay if we're not the world reserve currency, like, what does that mean? I mean, it's just really interesting to think about. Like, of course, the Great Reset is not in his favor, but it's also not in Putin's favor either. And I think that's basically he was pushed in a corner to do what he had to do as far as Ukraine goes, because Ukraine is basically a sandbox of totalitarian, technocratic, pedophile like playground to experiment with CBDCs and just think of like the panopticon. That's what it's been. It's also been a a bed of just experimentation with biolabs. Like, that is a for sure thing. And then you've also got NATO expansion, which is just, I'm gonna put this little nuke here. We're just testing missiles, and they're just like mid range, whatever the fuck it might be. You're poking the bear, and you know the war over there is basically ended. And the only reason that they are continuing that war is just for like a PR campaign and to make it look like they know what they're doing over there. But also I think it's kind of like a waning distraction away from the military-industrial complex kind of deals that are probably going on. I should have looked more into that, but it's also a distraction from what's probably going to be happening in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I'm mispronouncing that, but apparently there's that territory wants to go into NATO, but there's a adjacent territory. I think that's still like within Bosnia. That is a basically Russian, uh, uh, not ally. Just what did the U.S. Whatever. Let's just call it like Russian asset. And it's just like they're trying to find ways to get Russia into like starting a nuclear war somehow, because this is kind of like the Great Reset's agenda, is to siphon off all the energy to the plebs in Europe and like starve them out. And because they know their like green energy solutions are retarded, they retard the progress of like energy per capita, and Europe is just kind of a shit show. And ultimately, what Davos is trying to do is freeze any capital flight into the US or even Russia at this point, because Russia could very well force the world on a gold standard, or at the very least a ruble standard in the greater Eurasian area. Like, the ruble could very well be the I guess regional reserve currency in Asia and Europe, because they sit on the world's majority of oil and people want their oil. I mean, all the oil that we have, we export the majority of it because we can't refine it. But, Russia has those capabilities. And so this is kind of like, I guess, where the game theory comes in. But, what is Pal kind of like folding here to some extent? Because what's bad for Europe being starved out and destroyed by Davos is also bad for America, right? Because again, it's like central banks for central banks and trying to destroy the credibility that the dollar has. And of course, preventing Davos from doing that in Europe is in a way meaning that Putin has to I guess maybe make the ruble or gold, that'd be awesome, a new reserve currency. And so it's kind of like pals folding and admitting that there needs to be like a global like bifurcation of reserve assets. So there's so many pieces going on, but it's really interesting to think about and what is actually going on in these people's heads.
It is certainly all going on at the moment. I wanted to ask you, so if Russia and China are doing
You
trade,
sound like a robot.
better now.
I think so.
So if Russia and China are doing trade, a lot of people would say, but what about China? They're further ahead in terms of their digital yuan, and they've got more gold than Russia.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't they be the kind of reserve currency for the East? But I think would you say Russia's kind of the more dominant potential reserve for the East because they have no debt, they're set up better economically than China is?
Yeah, they have like stockpiles of assets and not nutrients. Oh my gosh, what am I trying to think of? What's the word? Um well,
Natural resources.
yeah, there we go. Natural resources. Jesus Christ. Yeah, they have natural resources. They have a flat tax. They have a positive balance sheet, and ultimately, I think China. Like, I should do more looking into China, but just from what I have heard, I just don't have any great vibes about them. I do believe that they're kind of like the paper tiger, and they're having to export all of their inflation by acting as a quasi IMF because they don't enforce as much like austerity or if any on these other like island nations or Africa. I mean, the kingdom of Tonga, like Lord Fusatua is in here, and he's basically saying like, yeah, like China's acting like a IMF because they do need to export their inflation. And you've got like the Chinese contagion as well, and just ghost cities. They're economically not stable. And so, sure, Russia's partnering with them, but they need somebody to help create like their payments infrastructure. And sure, there might be opportunities for like a panopticon kind of thing there, but I don't think Putin wants that. And Tom says it perfectly when he says the way Putin is ruling Russia is basically like if Pat Buchanan won the presidency whenever he ran. He's a nationalist, and that's not like some alt-right, like crazy Nazi nationalist kind of thing. If you think that, go fuck yourself and like just listen to some episodes or something or read a book. Putin is being forced into a corner, and he cares about Russia because he brought it out of the fucking Soviet Union. And it only makes sense to I mean, he was kicked out of the World Economic Forum, like, after he invaded, and it's not some, like, 5D chess thing where he's actually buddies with Klaus Schwab. Like, no, he's a nationalist, he's doing what is right for Russia, and he's just has made economically rational decisions. Like, he let the ruble float and, kind of went through a slow, painful grind in 2014. But it's almost like he's taking these Austrian economic approaches, letting markets do their thing. Now, I don't know how controlled their economy is. It probably is to some extent, but at the same time, it's much more like free market capitalist than the U.S. My roommate, he went to Russia with his fiance, and he basically spent $600 for both his medical and dental, and his fiance's medical and dental, and it's just like, wow. Uh, so just economic health of Russia, I think it would be counterproductive for them to like be embedded in the same kind of capital controls that China has. So it's like that's a worry that people have, like this commingling between China and Russia. I personally, and then this is just me like talking from my brain. I personally don't think that's a worry. And China thinks things out in a very long term, low time preference, the game of Go time frame, right? Because they think of centuries, whereas like Americans think of like quarterly fucking goals. And so I think that is Putin working with China is just kind of like the enemy of my enemy is my friend. China's sanctioned, Iran sanctioned, all these fucking countries have just been dicked down by the US. And well, I think, and mainly Davos. and essentially they are just kind of China's going along to get along to what they think is best for them, and so it only makes sense for them economically and I guess politically to partner with Russia. I hope that answers your question, Luke.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know how to look at the whole China Russia thing. I think them teaming up is potentially very, very interesting.
I mean,
Like
they
the
didn't
amount of
have a choice.
what's that?
If you think about it, like they didn't really have a choice.
Yeah, 100%. I think China's going to kind of keep Russia alive because they have so much energy and resources. Does this mean Europe?
Wait, China's gonna keep Russia alive, or Russia's gonna keep China alive?
Well, it's vice versa because they both kind of have deficiencies that the other can help them with. So, like China has an energy crisis at the moment that depleted all of their water resources. They're heavily dependent upon coal. They don't have as much oil as Russia, but Russia has a shit ton of oil. So naturally, Russia can export its oil to China, but then China can also help Russia out by buying its oil and buying its wheat and actually helping it out economically from that standpoint. So I think that's interesting, and just the fact they both have so much gold kind of makes it more and more interesting. I'm on record as saying gold's going to zero, and I really do think it is.
Yeah, in like a century,
Yeah, I'm probably more.
maybe
Yeah,
like 8, I don't know, but it's definitely gonna be around. Like I had fun saying gold's a shitcoin. Like it's fun to say, but gold's fucking cool, and like there's a reason it's been the world's money for 5,000, 10, whatever, however fucking long years, and like it's here to stay. I mean, like yeah, it's gonna become an industrialized metal, but I mean, for now, this is kind of like because of his Lindy, this is what nation states believe in, and at the same time, like they have more control over that than Bitcoin. But like, don't get me wrong, I think all these nation states are mining Bitcoin in one way or another.
do you think that's happening now?
Does the bear shit in the woods?
Oil played. I'm going to put myself on the record and I'm going to say I think they are. I think Russia definitely is mining Bitcoin.
Well, I
I
mean, isn't it obvious that China is because of the whole like ban it, not ban it, and like the price manipulation, and maybe they like under the table like nationalize some of their miners, and it's silly not to. I mean, they're smart. I mean, it's China that we're dealing with, like leading tech hub, industrial, like they're hardware geniuses. I mean, that's why we export all of our fucking shit like that to them. So they have to understand miners. I mean, like that's where fucking like Bitmain came out of. Uh if they're not mining Bitcoin, like in China at least, then they're doing it elsewhere. Because I mean, you got to wonder what's going on with that Belt and Road Initiative, right? So I don't know. I'm just making generalizations and pulling stuff out of my ass, but they can't not be mining Bitcoin, and nor can Russia.
yeah, I don't really. I mean, I don't know how to look at China. I think Russia's definitely mining Bitcoin. China, I'm not so sure on. Like China shot themselves on the foot a century ago with them not transitioning onto a gold standard. I think they refused to transition onto a gold standard when the rest of the world was using gold as pretty much the global reserve currency. China held firm, and when they're using silver for like nearly a century, and they lost something like 80 to 90% of their purchasing power over that century. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're doing that again with Bitcoin. They're shooting themselves in the foot and essentially choosing the weaker, softer money. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure if China's still mining Bitcoin. It's really interesting. I know that there's still a shit ton of mining rigs on in China. Lono is actually in the crowd. Maybe we can bring him up and see what he knows about the
Yeah, bring
China.
him up because he keeps DMing me, and I'm just trying to go with the flow in the show. So
Let's
let's
do it.
let's have
Phil and
him.
I, Phil and I have been talking for nearly an hour, so I was going to bring up guests towards the end anyway. So if anyone has any questions, request guys, you can pop up and we can open up the floor. Um, Lono.
Phil more about, yes, there's mining going on in China. It is 100%. Not all of it left. About 20% of it stayed. They did rolling blackouts after. We weren't sure if they were popping VPNs or ghost mines. But if anyone thinks the mining is done in China, they don't understand China. And someone who you should talk to on this, Hash Override, he grew up in Hong Kong. Even though he's American, you see him in like all the bit farm stuff now in the hydro. He ran like 4 major farm type things over there. He knows China mining like the back of his hands. And he's explaining it to me, how all the different provinces work there, how business works there. They are so much like United States, the provinces in China. You can have mining like a death sentence in one area of China and it's totally okay in another. That was the state before the crackdown. And with the crackdown, yes, I believe that all non-completely trusted and controlled miners left China. But in no way did that get rid of this very powerful tool that when it's in the hands of people they trust, they don't fear the capital flight because they already control those people, kind of like Putin and his oligarchs or whatever, just the Chinese version of that. Then you can let those people work with that on your energy because they do have a lot of weird energy problems that this does assist with. There's some other stuff that's going on. So it's not out of there, but it's dead in a free sense, right?
Wait, like their energy problems I think, is what had them like marry Russia with the whole energy thing.
Oh yeah, they shoot like when they can't do stuff, they were just shooting raw energy into the ground. Now, I guess we have the hydrogen collider in Europe, and that's just another story completely. But yeah, Bitcoin mining was satisfying more than just money in some areas and stuff like that. It was actually probably a much better thing to do than just unleash your energy when you couldn't use it.
Hey, Lono, so like the key question though is the CCP mining, or are some of these? And I think you kind of hinted it's something you said, but are some of these Chinese miners not nationalized, but state run,
Oh
controlled?
yeah, everybody left there state controlled and completely trusted and been told you are allowed to do this under whatever guise. You guys remember when they coughed up that guy that had 40 billion in gold? That was an internal dispute. It's not like they just found a guy with 40 billion in gold, beneath his thing, hiding from the Chinese government. That was a pawn that needed to be taken out in a great game of chess over there amongst themselves. So, as much as we look at from our side, oh, China, what's going on? Like within that country, holy hell, what's going on too? It's always on the thread of going through some weird social revolution. It's always on the edge of some very major issues or another complete crackdown. It's so much on the edge of that.
What do you know that's happening right now, and do you know of any of that in relation to Russia?
No, with Russia, I'm not so sure. Like when I look at China, I'm just mostly focused more on the Uyghurs. I get distracted with that because everybody gets distracted from the important things, I think, as all these new things happen. Like to me, what's going on, like I don't know how old you are might affect this because when I was growing up, they were killing all their female babies, or it was disturbing for about a decade. That created like I think it was a near 10-to-1 offset of male to female. Now I think that
Right.
through, right? Like one statement about China, and I knew this when I was like a teenager, basically. It's like maybe 15 years ago, was really set in my mind. But China is the only nation in the world that can say we would be better off without 100 million men. There's not one nation on this planet that can say that other than China. And when you have that many men, it either leads to war, gang problems, or they need to do economic expansion, colonialism style, which is what they have chosen to do. But can you imagine being a man or someone like that you're just never going to have a wife if you're lower class, you don't have your math, like there's just no life for you, there's no hope, there's no family. That's all taken away from you as a kid, and it as a teenager, it it's never going to happen. That's devastating, and that's like in the middle of this. Like these people are in their mid-20s now to mid-30s, and it's a huge issue that we don't talk about again. So when I look at what could help with Russia, great, China's going to play its game, and I think people think we're too secure. We are very cocky, and we are going to get kicked in the nuts a bunch during this process. And if we think we can bully China into not helping Russia or this, they'll just do it underhand. And I grew up, and everyone told me the BRIC nations were going to do great. Now the BRIC nations are coming into their own. It's like, what? This is what you guys told us would happen for like 30 years. This isn't something new. None of this is a surprise. But the real surprise is, I believe we gave the green light to do all of this with our reaction to COVID and the corruption that happened over here. And it's disgusting corruption. If you look at what happens at the top of both the Canadian and the US government, we have no high moral ground to talk to people anymore. And that's the problem. And when that happens, all the states, and this is the history of humankind, everybody starts to extend their power for their own. They start to either settle beefs or continue things or continue righteous ideologies. And it's going to spread around the world now that the big guys allowed it. Unless someone was willing to do something very crazy and say, nah, if you guys want to get into this is over next day, well, we're going to go into something ugly and a reset because we're not even on the same page here. We get split more and more every day by just stupid things in the West that we actually can't, I think, counter these moves. We kind of have to let it happen, move back into geopolitics and circles. And sorry, Western Europe, and sorry, the area around China. And the people that I'm more worried about is Japan and China's eternal hate from them from World War II that they teach every year. They go show you, they show their kids the square where Japanese soldiers cut off like 100,000 people's heads or something like that. And men and the women and children too, right? It was brutal. So if those old flares start to come out, that's what I'm worried about. I'm not as worried, Russia and Ukraine will be whatever. And if the US wanted to put someone that was playing around in Soviet states as their leader and be dumb about it, that's up to them. I can't do anything about that. I've got my own loser at the top of my country selling us out to the World Economic Forum that I got to worry about. But yeah, so China and all of that, they get to play a safer game. But again, they've got a lot of social upheaval and unrest. They're using technology and technocrat stuff to really get in on it. And, it's not even about facial recognition. It's about gait. Like the way you walk, they can tell who you are with cameras now. If you go look into gait analysis, would be something all Bitcoiners should look into. By the way, throw a pebble in your shoe. All right. But, so I think we've given them breathing room actually right now. I don't think they're always don't have a lot. I think we've given them some extra breathing room, even with all their social issues. But the thing we could push down on them is we could push down more on the Uyghurs again and bring them back to that conversation so they have no moral high ground and they have to stay on the defensive on that one. That would be my strategy with China. I wouldn't be talking about Russia this. I'd be going right back to the Uyghurs and say, what the fuck?
As we probably should. I mean, it's disgusting the amount of companies and countries that initially just, went along with the whole Chinese Olympics and continue doing deals with China, and they don't even mention that.
Ray Dalio.
Oh, Dalio. Yeah, it's disgusting. I would love to see some pushback about the whole Uyghur situation because it's not talked about in mainstream kind of circles. And I think the US is gets into another question I wanted to push your way there, Phil, was about the US and what they're going to do. Because for me, I have a feeling that maybe the US is being pushed into, they're having their backs pushed into a corner. And I really wouldn't be surprised to see them actually come out a lot sooner than a lot of people think and back the US dollar with Bitcoin. And I noticed I think it was your article about Jerome Powell and the USD, you had a really good quote in there. I'm going to see if I can pull it up. But it was something along the lines of the reallocation of capital could also demonetize US treasuries and be redirected into Bitcoin as a new pristine form of collateral, creating a quasi-Bitcoin dollar hybrid standard. So maybe we could riff off that for a minute. What do you guys think about the whole US potential Bitcoin dollar?
Yeah, honestly, it feels a little pie in the sky, but I know it's inevitable. That's why I wrote that. And ultimately, it's a matter of time. And I think gold is actually going to be, again, thrust into the forefront because, again, Russia has a lot of gold, they have a lot of oil, and they will probably, if not rubles, they'll demand, oil for exchange for gold. And the price of gold will, go up, oil goes down. So it's just, you're not entirely sure, what's going to happen with this. I keep saying Bitcoin is going to be inevitable. I think it's a matter of gutting out the powers that be there are like what come midterms. And I haven't looked much into this, but I know that the current administration, and with this majority, has pissed a lot of people off. Like just looking at COVID and just mass mandates or whatever the fuck it is, just people not have like lost their livelihoods ever since, and they want a change. And I think just as bitch as it sounds and feels to say, I think getting like the right people in will actually make some sort of difference. And you have people like Ted Cruz and Cynthia Lummis and them talking and looking at Bitcoin in a more serious way. Uh, It they can't go balls to the wall like backing treasuries or Bitcoin replacing treasuries is the nuclear option. But as we see, Davos is having to pull their nuclear options by doing what they're doing. And so who really knows? I don't really like I honestly don't know. I'm just one person. I would love for that to happen. And the way that Bitcoin grows and works is exponential. So it's not going to happen overnight, but I think the next 10 years at least is going to be very interesting to watch. That's my non-answer answer.
But Phil, um, these are layers, and I go back to 1996 a lot, and I like to talk about Phil Zimmerman and the encryption wars and what happened there. And like literally in Europe and Germany, they're reversing that right now. They're demanding backdoors and encryption, and Bitcoin cannot live in a world like that. And they're literally setting down those laws as we speak, as we're trying to fight for Bitcoin. They're actually going into checkmate mode on the
Oh
sub
yeah. Yeah.
technologies. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
believe that
So
if it's a politician, you don't want them preaching Bitcoin. You want them hard on the side of encryption is necessary for sanity in the future and for privacy in the digital self. And to touch encryption without a court order should be akin to the public looking at you and say, why are you touching someone's digital privates? It should be that offensive that people should never touch it. It should be
yeah,
private
but
unless you have a
no,
court
the
order.
majority of them are already pedophiles. Like, let's be honest, I don't mind touching people's privates.
Yeah, well,
But
I'm saying like we need to put the people in
joking,
power that don't
hold on,
want
hold
to
on, hold
touch.
on. All joking aside, I think the whole like encryption privacy thing is just a byproduct of realizing the importance of Bitcoin. And because Europe is not being Bitcoin friendly, they actually hate that shit. This this is again like European globalists versus US globalists and Wall Street. And from what I've heard and seen, Wall Street loves Bitcoin, and that might kind of go over some people's heads in here, but that is the case. And if it comes to preserving the dollar's relevance and strength, then they will do exactly the opposite of what Davos is doing, which is they are not friends of Bitcoin at all.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's in America's best interest to preserve itself with Bitcoin. And so maybe we do see something happen faster in 10 years, 5 years, who the fuck knows? But it's a very rational, but it is nuclear.
What's Canada like, Leno?
Western Canada's good. Eastern Canada lost their mind. And we've always been, Trudeau's have always hated us. Their dad put the National Energy Program in, and we lost all our houses in the 80s. And now little twerp comes in, which is not even a shadow of his dad. Even if I didn't like his dad, at least he had class and a purpose. You get hedge fund baby in, and he sells our country out to foreign interests. It's very clear. Him and Christy Freeland, he put in an entire team that is either delusional or completely bought in like a cult to what's going on in Davos. But they were raised under it. It's not like they are Davos. They are the World Economic Forum. Trudeau, Christy Freeland, like people like they're working for them. Like, no, they are it. They represent it. Like they built it. They're the heart of it. People like that. That's what they did over the last 20 years or so. And then inserted it, or as he puts it, penetrated the governments of the world. Like, wow, and I look at that and what I grew up under in my proud country and what has happened under this disgusting leadership was only one. He only got into power. Harper would have won had he accepted marijuana. That's the funny thing about all of this. If you look at the Canadian election, how they were, we had a conservative government that was willing to sign in gay marriage, but medical, like legalization of marijuana is where he drew the line. what an idiot. Harper put the gun in his house there, head there, and just gave the election to Trudeau. He bribed, he did it, he put that through. And after that law was through, he went to work on destroying the West, the oil, only pumping green energy in Davos's plans, only investments there. Any pipeline, anything was like fighting a nuclear war battle. And we've been going through that far before COVID, right? And COVID was just a chance for them to double down and strangle us. And that's why you got the trucker convoy from Alberta go all the way out and spend their time to go out to Ottawa, which is no slight journey. It's like a 3-day drive out there to say, fuck you. And then they got comfortable and too organized, and they lost their minds in our parliament. He hid for what? You guys remember? He hid for like 2 days while they're on their way. At least his dad would have like probably sent a delegation out to Winnipeg or something and say, hey, what's up? At least we should chat before you get here. What do you want? You know, like you kind of know, but there would have been a process, a form, not this disgusting behavior that we've seen. And most Canadians, they're not like Americans. We voted all over the spectrum during our lives. This might put a nail forever in that. And I don't like that. I don't like what they've done at all. I feel very betrayed. And I feel that we don't have control of our country and our resources are being sold out from under us.
Yeah,
so China I worry about, but I'm more worried about my own government.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Well, that's what a lot of people miss, Lono. Like, Justin Trudeau was he was part of the whole World Economic Forum's program.
Oh, Luke, you're a robot. Unfuck your audio. Hey, why don't you mod me so I can help bring up people who have questions?
Okay. Am I better now?
Yeah, you go in and you're good at first, and then after like 20 seconds, you start to get like twangy. I'll laugh if you go twangy.
Okay. Yeah, this is why I never do podcasts in spaces. It's just a little bit dodgy. But what I was saying was Trudeau, he's actually part of the World Economic Forum's program they had going on.
Global leader.
Yeah. It's unbelievable, and people don't get that. People think we're just a bunch of tinfoil hat conspiracy theorists ragging on about the World Economic Forum. No. He's literally the Prime Minister of Australia, Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinta Ardern, that devilish horse-looking thing. They're all part of the World Economic Forum's programs, the young global leaders. And like Lono said, it's Klaus Schwab's most proudest achievement, instituting his young global leaders into the cabinets of governments around the world. So I think it's essential that the US kind of gives a big middle finger to the Great Reset crowd, and breaks up all this bullshit that's going on around the world.
I agree. And it is uncanny that they are very out in the open with what they want to do. And the text in The Great Reset, the book that Klaus Schwab wrote, is, I mean, it's not like doom and gloomy. They try to paint it in a very pleasant picture. They use their euphemisms and everything, but it's not that hard to read like between the lines, or at least for any Bitcoiner, at least, or anyone that's quote unquote like woke or red pilled or whatever. But I always hesitate. Like, oh, I don't want to say this because I'll sound like a conspiracy theorist, which conspiracy theorist is not like a slander. That's just a mechanism the media used to just
Degrade.
disenfranchise people that think for themselves. But again, this is what is happening. Like, they do not give a shit about you, and
like I grew up in cadets.
It is just over power, and power makes you stupid.
Like,
And they're having to make the most stupid decision by going nuclear and doing what they're doing.
And I grew up beside some of these people. Like, when I was flying, I flew Trudeau before he was ever in politics, and he was still his drama teacher stuff. Chatted with him. I've met these people. I've met Harper. I've phoned their kids and chatted with them, and that's where you can get a lot of information. Like, how well-rounded are they? Are they playing? Do they have hockey cards, or are they weird? Like, you can start to tell a lot about these people in power. And the one thing that really got me was, I am a true believer that if you have a top position in a country, that is your only duty, or it's basically treason. Like, if you are the president of the United States, your sole loyalty must be to the United States. Now, what truly is a conflict of interest in that is Christy Freeland, who sits on the board of the freaking World Economic Forum. She's on the board of trustees, and she's our deputy prime minister. At the least, that's a conflict of interest, and everybody should be able to see that. Not even criticizing the World Economic Forum of this. It's like, wait. You shouldn't be allowed to sit on anything else if you're our deputy prime minister. Like, quit and go do that then. But what the hell? But yeah, go look at that. And then you start to see these people holding dual positions, and you're like, well, who's your loyalty to?
We could go down the World Economic Forum rabbit hole for hours and hours and hours. It's certainly an interesting one. But Phil, we've been going for a little over an hour now. A question I like to kind of round podcasts out with my guests is, what does the world look like in 10 years' time? So 2030, what does the world look like with Bitcoin? Is Bitcoin still alive? Who's adopted Bitcoin? What's 2030 look like in your eyes? Oh, what's he doing? Is he making tea?
In 2030, if you guys keep at
Oh,
it.
sorry. Was my mic off?
Yep.
You're muted, bro.
Yeah. By 2030, there's no great reset, hopefully. Like, that's their goal, right? And central planning always fails. And right now they're scrambling and they're worried and they're just having to do their nuclear option, which is insane. And so I think I look, I don't have a crystal ball, but if I did, or I'm just gonna bullshit my way out of this. Yeah, America is gonna embrace Bitcoin whether they like it or not in the next 5 years, and people are gonna get onboarded, and will have beautiful user experience and interfaces for all for Bitcoin. And I don't know, like, of course that's like a fantasy. I don't know. We're definitely going to need to re re, gut out all the filth and swampiness in DC to some extent. I think the midterms might help with that. And I also think that even if it doesn't, then there's still some sort of sovereignty between states, and hopefully we see some secession, because I think that would be great. If Davos wins, that means that that's basically not possible, right? Because I mean, they're trying to do like this new world order thing by, getting these other countries into NATO so they can just be on like their watch, right? And just have this top-down authoritarian control. And if they win, that means that you don't have that breakaway and that state sovereignty. So, I'd like to see states like Texas and Florida and whoever else secede and go their own way, however that looks. And again, that sounds like pie in the sky as well. But I guess I'll leave it with a formula for success that I think would be interesting is, I always show this, but it's a speech called by Hans Hermann Hoppe called "What Must Be Done," and he gave it in 1997 at some Mises event, I think in Los Angeles. And he essentially lays out what we need to do as individuals and states to work against like a totalitarian top-down federal US government state. And it's essentially the game plan for secession and using your local government, and really like voting Republican or running in that campaign, but voting for fiscally conservative and rational policies like lowering taxes, and having parent teacher or parent teacher conference, or having parents more involved in just the workings of school and education and stuff like that. Just hyper localism. And I think that really becomes successful if you pair that with Bitcoin, just because of the fuck you moneyness of it, and the more boomers and parents that see Bitcoin on Fox News or on Tucker Carlson, and when Glenn Beck has Adam Curry as a regular guest, and Michael Malice. I mean, just the tides of like culture, as like left to right as we see it, are changing at such a radical rates and dynamic. And so the truth is breaking out one way or another. And I think Bitcoin is just the easiest adjacent tool to compare that with. Again, I'm just one dude. I don't know how this shit looks, but I believe in humans and self sovereignty and entrepreneurship. And as doom and gloomy as things might appear right now, I I'm really really optimistic about everything. And Bitcoin and people that want to better themselves are going to lead the way.
What a great note to end things on. I couldn't agree more, Phil. I think that's a great take. I think human ingenuity will always win out, and I think a lot of people do say the Bitcoin is a bit doomsday, a little bit pessimistic. I really don't think we are. I just think we see the world as it
Yeah,
is. And
the Bitcoiners that say porn's bad for you, like that's annoying. But doomsday porn, just cut that shit out. You're just looking to get off in people's misery.
definitely, I always say to people, don't sit there and whinge about problems all day if you don't have a solution. I think the Bitcoiners can correctly identify the problems around the world, but they also actually have the solution in the form of a beautiful little orange pill. And I think it is going to make the world a much better place. And we just get the fun of watching it all unfold. So thanks for coming on the Fix the Money podcast, Phil. I had an absolute blast. Thanks for everyone who jumped in. If there's no other questions, we're probably going to round it out here.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Luke. This was great. And everybody follow Luke and the shit that he does. Writes amazing pieces. I've always been one to kind of get in the weeds of like charts and everything. And I know he's not like a magic like tea leaf kind of reader, but it's cool that there's people like you and TXMC that have that speciality. So it's awesome what you're doing, dude. Thanks for having me.
Cheers, brother. Back at you. Keep writing the good articles and keep the podcast up. It's
Bet.
really interesting.
Peace.
See you guys.